Hello everyone, Dr. Mad here. Let's get mad about Macbeth. So we're going to look at Act 1, Scene 2 now. And in this scene, so at the beginning of the play, there is a battle going on. Scotland is under attack from Norway, helped by some Scottish traitors. So remember, the play is set in Scotland around about 1050 AD. Macbeth and Banquo are fighting back on behalf of King Duncan. So Macbeth and Banquo are soldiers, generals, and they're best friends. Macbeth is promoted to be the Thane, or which means the chief of Cawdor, who is one of the traitors. Macbeth, after winning the battle, is promoted. Now, before we analyze the scene, let's have a listen to the scene.
What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, of the revolt the new estate.
This is the sergeant, who like a good and hardy soldier fought against my captivity. Hail, brave friend! Say to the king the knowledge of the broil, as thou didst leave it.
Doubtful it stood, as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their art. The merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a rebel, for to that the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him. From the western isles of kerns and gallow glasses is supplied, and fortune on his damned quarrel smiling showed like a rebel's whore. But all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well he deserved that name, disdaining fortune, with his brandished steel which smoked with bloody execution, like valor's minion carved out his passage till he faced the slave, which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him, till he unseened him from the nave to the chaps and fixed his head upon our battlements. Oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman, as whence the sun gins his reflection, ship-wracking storms and direful thunders break, so from that spring whence comfort seemed to come, discomfort swells. Mark, King of Scotland, mark. No sooner justice had, with valour armed, compelled these skipping kerns to trust their heels, but the Norwegian lord, surveying vantage with furbished arms and new supplies of men, began a fresh assault. Dismayed not this our captains, Macbeth and Banquo? As sparrows, eagles, or the hare, the lion. If I say sooth, I must report they were as cannons, overcharged with double cracks, so they doubly redoubled strokes upon the foe. Except they meant to bathe in reeking wounds or memorize another Golgotha, I cannot tell. But I am faint, my gashes cry for help. So will thy words become thee as thy wounds. They smack of honour both. Go get him, surgeons. Who comes here?
The worthy Thane of Ross.
What haste looks through his eyes? So should he look that seems to speak things strange.
God save the king!
Whence camest thou, worthy Thane?
From Fife, great king, where the Norwegian banners flout the sky and fan our people cold. Norway himself, with terrible numbers, assisted by that most disloyal traitor, the Thane of Cawdor, began a dismal conflict, till that Bellona's bridegroom, lapped in proof, confronted him with self-comparisons, point against point, rebellious arm against arm, curbing his lavish spirit. And to conclude, the victory fell on us.
Great happiness.
That now Sweno, the Norway's king, craves composition, nor would we deign him burial of his men till he disbursed at St. Column's Inch $10,000 to our general use.
No more that Thane of Cawdor shall deceive our bosom interest. Go pronounce his present death, and with his former title greet Macbeth.
I'll see it done.
What he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won.
Okay, so that's scene 2. I hope you enjoyed that. So there's a summary again. Now let's just go through scene in a bit more in some detail. But remember, with Macbeth at GCSE level, you don't need to understand every single line, every single word. Okay, you just need to know the main characters, the plot, the themes, and so on. And you need to be able to read the play, or when you're given an extract, to be able to understand most of it and be able to pick out words and phrases that you can talk about. Okay, but don't try to learn every single line and word. It's not necessary at this level. So, a camp near Forres. So, Forres is a town in Scotland. So, remember the play is set in Scotland in about 1050 AD. Alarum within. Alarm is just another word for alarm, or old spelling of alarm. Enter King Duncan, Malcolm, Donalbain, Lennox, with attendants meeting a bleeding sergeant. So King Duncan, his oldest son, Malcolm, Donalbain, his younger son, Lennox is a lord, one of the chiefs, or a lord, and attendants means servants. And then Duncan says, "What bloody man is that? He can report, as seemeth by his plight, of the revolt, the new state." So remember on the right-hand side here, you've got some help, glossaries and so on. So what Duncan is saying is, who's this man who's bleeding? It looks like he can tell us what the situation is with the battle. And Malcolm says, this is the sergeant who fought for me, who protected me from being captured. And he says, "Hello, hail, brave friend." So hail is just a greeting. And say to the king the knowledge of the broil as thou didst leave it. So tell the king what's the situation, what's going on. And the sergeant says, doubtful it stood. So he's saying that it was 50-50. Nobody was winning or losing. And then Shakespeare uses this metaphor as two spent swimmers that do cling together and choke their heart. So it's like two swimmers who are exhausted and they hold on to each other to try and protect themselves, to save themselves, but actually they end up drowning each other. And then the merciless MacDonald, so this is one of the traitors, worthy to be a rebel, for to that the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him. But don't worry too much about this line. It's just saying that MacDonald is a villain, he's a criminal, he's a rebel. From the western isles of kerns and gallowglasses is supplied. So these are just groups of soldiers. And fortune on his damned quarrel smiling showed like a rebel's whore. So he's saying that at this point, luck was on MacDonald's side. But all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name, disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution, like valor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave. So he's saying that Macbeth didn't care that luck didn't seem to be on his side. He had his sword, he held it up, and he cut his way through all the facing soldiers until he was face to face with MacDonald. So the slave is MacDonald. I mean, he's not really a slave. This is just a negative word say about him. And I mean, this line is a bit strange because it says that the slave or MacDonald didn't shake hands with Macbeth, nor did he say goodbye to him, which obviously, why would he? They're in the middle of a battle, right? But this is just Shakespeare being poetic. And Macbeth cut him in half till he unseamed him from the nave to the chops, cut him from the navel, the stomach, to the chaps or the chops or the mouth. Okay? So basically cut him in half and fixed his head upon our battlements. So I mean this shows here, this line shows that how Macbeth is physically strong. And then he could have just left it there, but the fact that he cuts his head off and puts it on the battlements, so these are the battlements, it's the top of the castle, and through these gaps soldiers can throw things or whatever. And so he puts his head on the battlements to show other people, other rebels, that this is what will happen to you if you rebel. So at this point, Macbeth is loyal to the king, he's faithful, and Duncan says, "Oh, valiant cousin, worthy gentleman." So he's praising Macbeth here, okay, not the sergeant that he's talking to. Although Macbeth is not here, Duncan is praising Macbeth. Now, this cousin, so Macbeth is kind of based on real life, on real history, but Shakespeare did change it to suit his purposes. We'll talk more about that later. But Duncan and Macbeth were actually related. They are cousins. So when Macbeth kills Duncan later, he's committing multiple sins. Actually, he's apart from anything else, he's killing a family member. Anyway, that's jumping ahead a little bit. And then this bit here, you don't need to worry too much about this speech here, okay? In terms of understanding it line by line, except to say that so Mark, which would normally be a name, here doesn't mean a name; it just means notice. So he says, "Mark, King of Scotland, Mark." So notice, King of Scotland, and basically this bit here is saying that the King of Norway. So the King of Norway is the one leading the rebellion, helped by some Scottish traitors. That at this point, the King of Norway managed to get new men, new arms, right, new swords or whatever, and began a fresh attack. Okay, and Duncan says, "Oh, did this not upset Macbeth and Banquo? Did this not scare them?" So captains are their rank. You can call them captain or general. They're high-ranking soldiers. And this line here, be very careful. This yes actually means no, because he then goes on to use a metaphor to show, again, this is Shakespeare being Shakespeare, that they weren't scared. So he's saying, as sparrows, eagles, or the hare, the lion, that in the same way that sparrows are scared of eagles or hares are scared of lions, in other words, they're not, obviously. It's the complete opposite. So basically, it's just a long roundabout way of saying that no, Macbeth and Banquo were not scared. In fact, in truth, they redoubled their efforts in fighting back, um, to the point where there was kind of blood everywhere. And he compares it to Golgotha, which is where Christ was crucified. So this is just a metaphor of comparing the blood flowing in the battle with the blood flowing from Christ. Okay, but then he says, "Oh, I can't talk anymore. My wounds need attention." So Duncan praises him and says, "Yes, your wounds and your words show how brave you are and how loyal you are." And he tells people, "Right, go and get him a doctor." So the sergeant goes, and then Duncan says, "Who comes here?" And enter Ross. So Ross is another nobleman, a lord, minor character. You don't need to worry too much about him. And Malcolm says to King Duncan, "Oh, this is the worthy Thane of Ross." So in those days, people's names were quite often named after places or the other way round. Anyway, so this is Thane, a chief, another Scottish chief. And Lennox says, from the look of him, he's got something strange to say. So Ross greets the king. God save the king. It's just a greeting, right? "Whence camest thou, worthy Thane?" So Duncan says, "Where have you come from?" And Ross says, "I've come from Fife, which is an area of Scotland." So this is where the rebellion is happening. And he's saying that the king of the Norwegian flags are flying. In other words, Norway is winning, or the Norwegian king is winning, aided by the Thane of Cawdor. So essentially here, Ross is just kind of finishing off the story that the sergeant was earlier saying. So Norway was winning, helped by Cawdor, until Bellona's bridegroom. So Bellona was the Roman goddess of war. So here he's basically talking about Macbeth. So bridegroom means husband. So the husband of the goddess of war would be the god of war. So he's praising Macbeth by calling him the god of war. Says how he fought back against the king of Norway. And to cut a long story short, Macbeth won. The Scots won. The victory fell on us. Yeah, so we won. The Scots won. Macbeth and Banquo won. And Duncan says great happiness. And then Ross says that in fact now Swino, the Norwegian king, wants a truce. And Ross says that Macbeth did not even allow him to bury his men until he had paid $10,000 as a ransom, if you like. And Duncan says that we're never going to let Cawdor deceive us again, cheat us again, lie and be a traitor again. So go and execute him. Tell him that he's going to be executed, and execute him, and give his title to Macbeth. So Macbeth is promoted to be the chief of Cawdor in the current Cawdor's place because of his battle, because of his loyalty to King Duncan and winning this battle. And Ross says, "I'll see it done." And Duncan, he just kind of repeats this, that what he hath lost, noble Macbeth hath won. So in other words, what Cawdor has lost, Macbeth has won. He has been promoted to be the Thane, the chief of Cawdor. So remember, you don't need to understand every single line and word. You need to know what's going on in the scene. So if we just go back to the beginning, at the beginning of the play, there is a battle going on. So you can read this summary here. But in terms of the scene itself, as long as you know the main plot, the main gist of what's happening in the scene, the main bit of it that is important is this speech here, this sergeant's speech. All right. And these quotes here, brave Macbeth. So this adjective, brave, being used about Macbeth. And this line here, which shows that he's physically strong. And this line here, this line here shows that he's physically strong. And this line shows that he's ruthless. He doesn't have any pity on MacDonald. And this whole scene showing how loyal he is to King Duncan. So the rest of the scene you don't really need to worry about. I guess this bit here is quite important, that even when Macbeth is then faced with another attack, he carries on. He's not just brave for a little bit. He's consistently brave. He's unrelenting. He doesn't give up. Okay? So, you just need to learn the summary of this scene, what's going on, and then these quotes are the important ones that you could learn. So, brave Macbeth, an adjective, brave used to describe Macbeth. This line here that we talked about shows that Macbeth is physically strong. This line that he's ruthless, has no pity. And we also know that Macbeth is very loyal at this point and principled. Okay? So, quick quiz that you should try and answer before you carry on. The answers are on the next slide, which I'll show you in a minute. The summary is earlier, if you remember, but see if you can answer these questions without looking. You can pause the video here, and when you're ready, go to the next slide. And here are the answers. If you weren't able to answer them straight away, you need to go back and revise and play the video over and over again. That's the whole beauty of a video. So that's Act 1, Scene 2 of Macbeth.